We now turn to the Epistle of James. But which James? There are at least 4 men mentioned in the New Testament bearing the name James. There is James, the brother of John, the sons of Zebedee. There is a second apostle referred to as James, the son of Alphaeus. Then we have a reference to Mary, the mother of James the Less. And then in the list of Christ's brothers, there is another James, the brother of Christ. Most certainly, there were at least 2 men named James. Jerome, the great Christian historian and philosopher from, 4th or 5th century, he seemed to think that James the Less, James the son of Alphaeus, and James the brother of Christ were all the same person. That he was not literally a brother of Christ, but just a cousin. And that Mary, the wife of Alphaeus, who was the mother of James, was the sister of Mary, the mother of Christ. I do not think Jerome is right. Now, there is good indication that James the Less, who is only mentioned as being a son of Mary, mentioned only at the crucifixion as one of the women who were there. This James, James the Less, and James the son of Alphaeus, one of the 12 apostles, was, well, I don't want to say was likely, but might very well have been the same person, giving us 3 different Jameses in the Bible. And the reason I say these 2 could have been the same person is because James, the son of Alphaeus, is mentioned only in the lists of the 12 apostles, while Mary, who is called the mother of James and Joseph, James the Less and Joseph, is only mentioned at the crucifixion. And so the idea that when we're referencing the apostles, we list him just as James, the son of Alphaeus, his father, which would be standard. You would generally identify anybody as the son of their father, not the son of their mother. But when you are referencing the mother or woman to establish who she is, you would reference her as the mother of her children. And so James being the son of Alphaeus does not contradict the idea of Mary being his mother. And because we have so little information on either one of them, it's not unlikely that they are the same person. But again then, we have James, the son of Zebedee. He was one of the 3, one of the first presidency. We have James, the son of Alphaeus and Mary, another one of the 12 apostles. Then we have James, the brother of Christ. Which one of them wrote the Epistle of James? The most common, what is considered the traditional view, is that it was the brother of Christ. I tend to agree with this. And I have not yet found any modern prophet who states otherwise. Matter of fact, every reference I can find, modern prophets have stated that it was written by the brother of Christ. So that is what I accept. It is a general epistle written by the brother of Christ to all the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, we have gotten into the point where the Gentiles are starting to accept the gospel. But this is in the early stages of the Gentile ministry. James is writing to all the Jews who have already been converted. He's not writing to a Gentile audience. He's writing to the Jewish Christians. And this is right at that beginning. I think James is writing this kind of to preemptively address the controversies that he knows are coming because of the Gentile conversion. A few things about James, the brother of Christ. He is also known as James the Just in history. I don't think he's ever called that in the New Testament, but history calls him James the Just because, according to a number of Christian historians, ancient Christian historians, he was a man of impeccable moral character. He was also the first leader of the church at Jerusalem. That would indicate to me that he was the bishop. He was the bishop over the church in Jerusalem. Possibly a stake president or something similar, but at least a bishop. There are some indications that the Paul kind of references him as apostle at one point, but it seems that in the ancient world there, in the New Testament world, all the general authorities were referred to as apostles. So you had the 12, but you had the 70, which are in other historical records referred to as the 70 apostles, rather than just the quorum of the 70. So James may have been a presiding bishop, and having that general authority role, he would have been referred to by Paul as an apostle. This is also why Paul and Barnabas are sometimes referred to as apostles. We don't know if they were actually apostles ever ordained into the quorum of the 12, but they would have been referred to as apostles because they were of a general authority. They were part of that general leadership of the church. Now, I have said in past videos that the 7 that were called, I thought were likely bishops, with Stephen possibly being the presiding bishop, but I think I was wrong. I think James was the presiding bishop, which is why he was centered in Jerusalem, and why when Paul came to visit, he only met with Peter and with James. He was meeting with the president of the church and the presiding bishop. Now, just like with the early church in these last days, we had Bishop Partridge was the presiding bishop, but he still oversaw as an acting bishop in a local congregation in Kirtland, while another bishop was appointed in Missouri. And so the structure that we have today with the presiding bishop not being over a specific congregation, that didn't come until later. It was a later development as the church grew, and I think we see the same thing in the New Testament. James, the brother of Christ, was the first bishop. He was called over the church in Jerusalem. As the gospel spreads and we get congregations in other towns, we'll get other bishops called over those congregations, while James remains the bishop in Jerusalem. But he still is in a general authority position as the presiding bishop. Now, there's a lot to say about James. He did apparently die a martyr's death. There's a couple of different stories, and some Christian historians, again, ancient Christian historians, attributed the siege and destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD to God's divine retribution against the Jews for killing James. When they killed James the Just, he was such a good man, such a righteous man, and the people all understood that his death was murder. Nobody thought it was justified, and shortly after, we get the invasion of Rome. And a number of people equated the invasion of Rome as a divine retribution against James. But now let us take a moment to discuss the Epistle of James itself. What this epistle is a general epistle, meaning it's not written to a specific congregation. It is written to all the saints. It was written at a time where the saints were primarily of Jewish origin. So it is written to the Jews, but the Jews that are scattered in among the Gentiles. It's not written to the Jerusalem Jews. It's written to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. And we can see a lot of things in here. He talks about the relationship, don't be respecters of persons. Don't treat the wealthy different than the poor. The gospel is going to bring everybody together and make us all equal. If we live by the law of the gospel, then all men become equal. That is his main point in his epistle. If we endure our trials and live the law of the gospel, then it will bring all men together as equals. Now, of course, his epistle was written in Koine Greek, or at least most likely written in Koine Greek. We don't have the original. We don't have the original of any book written in the New Testament or the Old Testament. We only have copies, and the earliest copy we have of James would have been made at least 100 years after his death. So it is most likely written, the original, in Koine Greek, because that was the most common language of the day, and he wanted to get the message out to everybody. But there's a lot of scholarly controversy over James. A lot of ancient theologians and scholars didn't like James. They thought it shouldn't be included. They disputed who wrote it. We trust today that it was written by the brother of Christ, but as early as the 3rd century, people were arguing over who actually wrote it. And because of this, when Martin Luther wrote or translated the Bible into German, he put James at the very end because it was of questionable origin. In more recent years, in the last century or so, people have been looking at the history of Christianity and seeing it as a fractured movement where you had Paul off doing his thing, and then James in Jerusalem was more keep everything kind of Jewish. We're all Christians, but we need to be Jewish Christians. Even the Gentiles need to become Jewish Christians. And Paul's saying, no, we got to get rid of all the Jewish stuff and just become Christians. And then they see Peter as kind of the bridging the two. And so they read in James, his very well-known passages of faith without works is dead, and they see this as James opposing Paul in his writings of salvation by grace alone, by faith alone. This, of course, is all Nonsense. James and Paul were both called of God. They both had the priesthood, and they both served under the direction of Peter. Both of their writings are doctrine, and they're both true. We need to understand Paul's writings in the context of what James wrote, and we need to understand James in the context of what Paul wrote. They both joined together to form a unified doctrine. So this, looking at the early history of the church as a fractured, you have the James movement and the Pauline movement and the Peter movement. No, they were a unified group in the first century. They did fracture later, but in the first century they were unified. And so we need to see James as being one with Paul. But James is the one epistle that is most disputed in the scholarly communities. Who wrote it, when it was written, why it was written, is all disputed.